Zoomers. Welcome to the world famous Sail Power Steam Museum Zoom program. We've got an awesome program for you tonight. This is going to be really a lot of fun. I'm Captain Jim Sharp. This is my pretty little wife, Meg, alongside me here. What would we do without a good woman to keep us on the straight and narrow? You know how that is. Welcome to the broadcast tonight. We're going to do a very interesting program on Captain Jack Crowell. Captain Jack Crowell, he's an amazing man. He is not only an Arctic aficionado, but of course he's a marvelous seaman. He's a marvelous captain, and he's a wonderful man. Has a great personality. He's a modest person, but very talented and really incredible. An incredible story about him tonight. He, of course, has passed away. This book, we put this book together for him. It has a DVD in there of the incident in the Arctic that we're going to see tonight. And Spence Apollonio, may he rest in peace, he was part of it. Penn Bay Press has put this out, and I called them up to find out if there were other copies available, and they said, well, they just sold 10 days ago. They sold their last copy. So now they're thinking of redoing it. They're thinking of republishing it again and putting it back on the shelf. So if you're interested in getting a copy of that, be sure and call Penn Bay Press and jog them up a little bit. Maybe they will do it. Captain Jack Crowell, of course, was a captain for Donald MacMillan, captain on the Bowden, captain on the Sachem, captain on the radio, and then, of course, Gertrude Thebaud. Donald MacMillan chartered the Gertrude Thebaud, and she was, of course, a Gloucester fishing schooner. Captain Jack Crowell's grandfather was a Gloucester fisherman and went out on these kind of vessels. So Jack thought to himself, when MacMillan chartered this vessel, well, it's a great idea. MacMillan wanted to take it on an excursion up to Frobisher Bay up in the far north. And Jack said, oh, well, that's a good idea, by gee, we'll do that. But little did he know that the Gertrude Thebaud, although she was built as a fishing schooner, she was really built to beat the blue nose. This was when the fishing schooners had an awful lot of competition going on. Who could sail the fastest? So, of course, the idea was to get back to market early with their catch, because the first vessel in, it was all by bid back in those days. First vessel in got the highest price. Well, that's what they needed to do. So they would race these vessels from the banks when they were solid full of fish. And so they would get to market and get the higher price. Well, that set up a international competition between Canada and America, Gloucester and Halifax and Lunenburg. Lunenburg was the fishing capital in Canada. Well, they had a race, and the Canadian Bluenose beat whatever we could put up there. And finally, in 1920s, they built the Gertrude Thebaud to win that race. It was built not as a good fisherman, but as more of a racing vessel than a fisherman. But that, notwithstanding, why they went ahead and raced, and of course the Bluenose still carried the cup home. But as I say, the vessel was built, well, a little more narrow. It was built for more speed than it was for fish carrying. Didn't have much room up in the forecastle. But they got up there and they got in trouble up at Frobisher Bay there. And oh my God, it was embarrassing. This is a place where they have, like the Bay of Fundy, they have huge tides, 25, 30 feet of tide. And the walls of the sides of the bay up in there, they go straight down to several hundred feet. There is no beach. It's just one sheer cliff all the way down. So when you anchor a boat and the tide turns and it swings around, my God, it swings around and gets itself on a rocket. That was what the embarrassing thing that happened to Jack Crowell at that time. But you can see the vessel's right up along the shore there. Fortunately, she fell towards the shore when she grounded out, because had she fallen the other way, she'd have turned over. She'd gone down into deep water. Just 30 feet beyond the other side of her, it was a sheer cliff that went right down to, well, several hundred feet where they had to anchor. But anyway, before we get well into that and before we get ensconced in this story, exciting story, well, let's listen to the commercial. We got to put a little commercial up here. Now, don't touch that dial. I'll try and speed through it so you won't have to suffer too long. I'm always so proud to show our new building. This is a building that we just completed last year. The old museum, wonderful museum, but it's full, and we needed more space. So in the new building now, we have a 40-foot steamboat with a 10-key calliope on the top deck. The wood-burning boiler in this steamboat, beautiful thing. We have a replica of the light horseman, Weymouth's vessel that discovered Penobscot Bay back in 1605. Oh, we have a whole parcel of Optimus prams. We have a Beetle Cat. We've got a Herreshoff 12.5. All these interesting traditional classic boats in our museum. I get so excited I sometimes forget about the other museum, the older part of the museum. This is the original part of the museum, and now, as I say, it's full, but it's a grand place. We have so much memorabilia in there, so many things to see. We have people that come in and say, "Oh my God, Captain, I had no idea you had such a marvelous array of memorabilia here." They say this is better than the museum in Bath. This is better than Mystic. They compare us to Mystic. I couldn't believe it. But anyway, everywhere you turn your head, you see something new and something interesting to look at in our old museum. And of course, our little schooner out there that you can go aboard and have your picture taken at the wheel. Anyway, some of the wonderful things we have, of course, since that museum's full, people are giving us things all the time. And a year ago, a man gave us this beautiful little ketch, Morning in Maine. And Morning in Maine, just interestingly enough, she is the best of the best. According to the polls here, just recently, they had the running of the best, the best sailboat in doing cruises, the best museum, the best this and the best that. Well, our Morning in Maine, this little vessel with Captain Tyler Watterson, he's a wonderful guy, and he's been sailing this boat in and out of Rockland Harbor, just awing passengers, having just such a great time. Couple of lighthouses, beautiful harbor tour, and he's a very, very interesting, gregarious kind of skipper. Give you a great cruise. Next year, you got to sign up for it and take 2 hours and see our wonderful harbor here. The Morning in Maine, a peach color ketch, nice sailing boat. And we, of course, have our skiff program. I always brag about our skiff program. I get so enamored by it. I get excited about it. We take these kids from 7, 8 years old to 14 years old, and we put them in a boat. Never been in a boat before, don't know anything about a boat, don't know what a rudder is or a centerboard or anything else. And we put them in the boat. We teach them how to put the sail up. We teach them how to steer them. We teach them what to do. And then we push them away from the dock. One kid in a boat, and he's got to take the tiller. He's got to take the sheet in his hand, got to put his telephone away. They don't even take it with them on the boat. Get them away from the internet, get them away out, get them out on the water. And my God, they soon learn, you know, their brains are such a sponge at that age. And as soon as they figure out how to do that and what makes that boat go, then they get excited and they really bear down on it. By the third day, they're turning the boat over and righting it back up again and bailing it out. By the fourth day, they're out there. They're actually racing against their buddies. By the fifth day, they are out in the outer harbor, going around the buoys and doing a race and becoming real sailors. Do they want to do it again? They absolutely do. The only thing is we're full all summer long because it's a free class. It's a week-long free class, and we're teaching these kids how to sail. And this is the way we do it. We take them, of course, it costs them nothing. We take them as they come. Kids from good homes, broken homes, kids from the streets, kids from school, any kid at all, you're welcome to come. And we ask you, if you send us $100, we will match your $100 with another kid. You get 2 kids for $100. And of course, we'll put it right down the line, 200 for 4 kids, 300, 6 kids, and so on up until we have 10 kids sailing, $500 if you can donate five. Oh, just donate as much as you can. You know, we got to keep these kids sailing. We've got to get them out there and show them how to do this. And we couldn't do it without you. So we thank you for whatever you can afford to send us to put into our skiff program. We also have a new thing we're starting up now, Sailor Classic. We have all these different boats that we have, Harrishop 12.5. So we've got 2 friendship sloops. We've got several Beetle Cats, whole parcel of the Optimus prams and cat boats, all kinds of different boats. So if you're a sailor and you don't want to have the maintenance of owning a boat, you don't want to have to pay dockage and all the rest of that, join our little Sailor Classic Sail Club, and you can take any of our boats out and sail them for as long as you want and help support it and help us keep that kind of a program going. We also do adult sail training. We do navigation courses. We do everything you can think of in the way of seamanship. So keep in touch with us. Keep in touch with our website, www.sailpowerseamuseum.org. Every Sunday we have a music jam. It's been going on for 14 years. Yesterday we had a beautiful jam. We had 16 musicians all singing the old time songs. They're bluegrass, they're folk, all kinds of different music. People bring their own creations or they do some of the old classic. Every Sunday afternoon, summer and winter, all year round for the last 14 years, we have had a music jam, and we'll be there next Sunday. Come see us. Bring your banjo. We have a great tent that we set up in the summer. We do all kinds of functions right down on the beach down there. You could do weddings, you can do anniversaries, you can do lunches, you can have fire on the beach down there and cook your hot dogs. We can see the people having a lobster bake here down in the lower left. We have a bluegrass band that plays for the luncheons. And you can come and bring your friends, 150 people. We've served 150 people lunch at that one time. So keep in touch with us. Now, let's get back to the program tonight. Voyage to the Edge of Disaster. Probably that's a little understatement. Disaster isn't on the edge there. The disaster has occurred there. And it was quite a harrowing thing and just an amazing time right there in a place up in Frobisher Bay where there's no communications. They didn't have radios back in that time. Strictly on their own. They got to get out of their difficulty their own way. And Captain Jack Crowell, of course, he was a man that could do it. Well, let me introduce Jack to you. Jack and Alice, this is Ilaho Harbor right here. That's the little bite of harbor between Kimball Island and Ilaho. I used to sail my schooner in there, the old schooner Adventure. She was a sizable vessel for that little harbor. But we would come with a nice southwest breeze of wind. We would come to the jaws where the harbor opens up. A little tight entrance way there. We'd be rolling along with the southwest wind with a boom all the way out, you know. And when you get to, well, what we called Skull Rock, which was right at the entrance to Ilaho Harbor, of course, the wind would back over from bouncing off of Kimball Island, and the old main boom would come across. You'd jibe right at the entrance as you went into the harbor. We would sail up in there and round up, plop our anchor down right in the middle where we had just about swinging room enough all the way around for the schooner. And Jack and Alice would come out of their little house and wave to us. And pretty soon Jack would be down into on his dock down there. He'd jump into his skiff. He had a little skiff there called Baffin, and he'd range out alongside the schooner and say, "Captain Tim, welcome to Ilaho." He'd say, "Come on up, Alice just made a wonderful apple pie." And Alice had the most delicious apple pies. I would go up there after dinner and have dessert with Jack. Oh, when I got anywhere near the house, you know, you could smell the pie. She always had a whole locker full of pies. And the coffee was there bubbling on the stove, the old wood stove. And Jack would welcome us. I'd go in and sit down, and Jack and I would light up our pipes. and he would sit in the great chair underneath the great big narwhal tusk lamp that he had in his living room, surrounded by all this Arctic memorabilia, and he would regale us with all kinds of tales of shipwreck and survival as we puffed on our pipes and listened to all of that. So Captain Jack, as I say, took the Bowden, he took the radio, he took the station and the Thebaud, and he loved the Arctic like any aficionado, any kind of an addict for Arctic. He was an amazing, wonderful man, very entertaining man. He started out, he wasn't much of a student, I guess. He left school when he was 15, 16 years old, and they didn't know what to do with him, so his father put him on school ship Ranger. So that was a federal ship, and it was a ship that carried 100 kids, teaching them the ways of a sailing vessel. And they were no nonsense kind of boats, you know, 2 bells, 5 o'clock in the morning, they would say, up hammocks, you swabbies, get out there, stow those hammocks in the netting, you know, clean the forecastle out, pull in for muster. All hands would run up on the foredeck there. Every man would get up there, and then they say, all right, every man up and over, and last man has to go over again. No one through the lubber hole. You sailors, of course, know what that's all about. But that's these men, 50 of them, they had two classes, 50 of them to a class. They would all scramble up that rigging on the foremast. Just to give you an idea, you can see on the mizzen rigging there, all the way back on the after end of the vessel, 2 guys are climbing up the rigging there. Well, if you can imagine 50 guys on the foremast here going up the rigging, going up first to the first top on the main mast, then going the topmast all the way up to the very cross trees on the topmast there, and 50 of them climbing up there, climbing over each other, swinging around past each other, trying to get there in a hurry. There's always one man that's got to be last. None of them wanted to be last, so they're climbing as fast as they can. Not through the lubber hole, not through the easy way to get in there alongside the mast, but they have to go up the futtock shrouds, out over the outside edge of those cross trees. Well, that made it a little harder, but these are young guys, and they're all strong, and they loved it. They went up over that kind of thing, and then after the last man went up for the second time, they would break and have breakfast. Then they work them all day long, scrubbing the decks, tending the sails, and doing all the things that a school ship would do back in those days. Jack got his teeth cut on that. He did a little yachting, he did a little few other things around, and finally he joined the Navy, the civilian Navy at the time, and he was put on we wanted to go to sea, of course, so we got a berth on the Westover. Westover was this is during the war, it was a supply ship, and it was headed for Brest, France. They were fitting out in this photograph, getting things ready to go. And then when they started out, it's quite a tale. Jack tells about it, told me about it, and it's quite a tale when they had engine trouble. Well, they had a destroyer escort and a convoy that they were going to join and head across the ocean, carrying a load of great long pine spars to build docks over there for the war effort, and they had engine trouble. So as they started across the Atlantic, they fell behind the whole fleet, and the destroyer escort, of course, went with the whole fleet, and they fell behind. After a couple of days, they were by themselves. The rest of the convoy had gone on ahead, and they just weren't making time enough to keep up. So they were by themselves for 2-3 more days, and they settled down to their routine, and they continued on, figuring on heading, even though they'd be late, they would be heading out. But Jack was just off watch, came back into the forecastle to have a little smoke and to relax for a few minutes, and all of a sudden the first torpedo hit and almost knocked him down on the floor. He ran to the door was jammed shut, couldn't get out. Finally, the vessel settled down. They finally got out the door and got up on deck, and the middle of the vessel was on fire. My God, everybody, the fire, it was chaos, of course. People were jumping overboard. the vessel was listing, and by and by, the captain came by and told Jack, go back, all the lifeboats were a mess, they couldn't get them overboard, go back and find a bunch of spars and dunnage and build a raft for everybody, as many as we can save that way. So Jack went back there to look for that. And about that time, another torpedo hit the armament, where they stored all of their ammunition. Oh my God, there was a tremendous explosion then, and it blew almost the whole stern off the vessel. And Jack was very badly burned. Of course, it knocked him out. When he finally came to, he realized there was nothing he could do, so he jumped overboard. And although he was badly burned, he was able to swim to another boat that only had 3 people in it, lifeboat, that apparently was damaged. But they tried to pull him up on there. His skin was so badly burned that his skin started to tear off of him. But they finally got him aboard and dropped him in the bottom of the boat, and he passed out there. Finally came to, and they rowed around and picked up other survivors that were in the water. Of course, there was oil all over everything. Some of the oil was burning, some of it wasn't, but it was covering everything. And Jack, in his condition, took the oars and they rowed the boat around, picked up a whole lot of other survivors. And then finally the vessel sunk and they were left. They couldn't find the rest of the lifeboats. They couldn't find anybody else. They were by themselves. And all of a sudden, submarines surfaced right in front of them. And they came alongside with a machine gun trained on their boat, trained on Jack and his companions. And the captain of the U-boat came out and said, "Where is your captain?" And the captain was aboard this boat, but he was dressed in overalls and torn shirt and wasn't recognizable as a captain. So they said that he went down with the ship. So finally they convinced the German captain of that fact and they let him go. They gave him the course for Brest so that they could sail. They were still 1,000 miles away, something like that. But they could sail for the French coast in the lifeboat, and they disappeared. Well, of course, they were in the lifeboat for over 5-6 days without any water, without any food, suffered tremendously from exposure. They were mostly delirious by the time they finally found a French fishing vessel off the coast of France. Anyway, that was the story of the Westover. There she is, dressed in her camouflage. That didn't do them much good, but that was Jack's one stint in the Navy. He got back, he spent some time recuperating, and finally he got the urge again. He wanted to go to sea again. In Boston, he found this vessel, the Brynhilda, which is a Norse goddess, and he joined the ship in 1919. You can see her sails there. Her sails are all patches. These are the light weather sails. These are the trade wind sails, not the sails she would use to go around Cape Horn. But she was a full rig ship, 3-mast, and Jack was quite enamored by this vessel. Built in Scotland, finest kind of a vessel, and Jack spent a couple of years in her, becoming quite proficient at square rig ships. But then he wanted to get to the Arctic, so he finally hitched up with Donald MacMillan, and Donald MacMillan was organizing an expedition in 1926. He got a vessel called the Sachem. He used as a supply ship, and he hired Jack to go captain on that vessel and follow the Bowden around to help supply her. They went to the Labrador and Greenland, and Jack became more enamored all the time by the Arctic. So, of course, in 1927, 28, they took both the schooner's radio and Bowden up. Jack was the captain on the radio. And then MacMillan went off on another excursion, and Jack took Bowden up into Frobisher Bay for the first time. and did some soundings and some. But of course, he's going without any charts. He's going up there completely without any kind of aid. The geography was extremely sparse, and much of it was wrong. And he was finding his way, trying to read the water from the ice barrel, the lookout barrel up on the foremast. If the water was fairly clear, which it is in most cases, except when you get near the glaciers, they could see down in the water about 10 feet and see what rocks that were ahead of the vessel. But with the sun in the wrong place or other factors, why you couldn't see much of anything. But anyway, off they go again back in 1930 to Iceland, 31 to Baffin Land, 34 back to Labrador, and so on. Many trips in the boat, and Jack was part of the whole thing. Jack and Alice, they between trips, they went to a little cottage down on Burnt Island, right down near Illaho, and they started their new home in 1938 and moved to Illaho in 1940 with a house that Jack built. And that's where he spent his time in between. 1936 had a little offer from the vessel, the Aretha Spinney. They were doing a movie called Captain's Courageous. And the Aretha Spinney was a Gloucester fishing schooner. Interestingly enough, it was a McManus designed schooner. He developed an awful lot of wonderful designs for the Gloucester fishing fleet. And when Jeff Thomas, he had the Aretha Spinney, Jeff Thomas built this My Old Schooner Adventure. And he went into Essex to the James Yard, and that built the Aretha Spinney. He said, I had the schooner Aretha Spinney, and you know, I enjoyed that vessel very much. You still have the forms here to build it when you built that vessel? And they said, oh, yes, we do. So he said, well, will you get those forms out, dust them off? I'd like to have the vessel just like the Aretha Spinney, but I'd like to have a little more room up forward. I'd like to have this, that, the other changed. And they said, well, great, we can do that for you. And then the Adventure in 1926 was built, kind of a one-off of the Aretha Spinney. Well, the Spinney was used for the movie in 1937, Captain's Courageous. Jack was aboard as a navigator and crew, and he didn't get along with Spencer Tracy very well. But Spencer Tracy, they shipped him out to California because they decided they had to take the Aretha Spinney to California. They tried to get a storm scene on the East Coast here. They went up to Labrador, they went up to Newfoundland. They waited and waited and waited till late in the season trying to get a storm, and there were no storms that year. So they decided they had to take her to California. So off they went down the coast, round through the Panama Canal, and up to California, where they could do the storm scene in the studio, where they could always go out and get a pizza in between times. But Jack went on the delivery and helped deliver that vessel out there. We sat there, he was telling me the story about how they stowed the mainsail when they got the storm off of Cape Hatteras, the storm that they always hoped they would get in Newfoundland. They had no cameras aboard. They only had a delivery crew, and the delivery crew, they were all Gloucester fishermen. And Jack told me, he said, you probably never heard the story about how we jibed that vessel in order to take the mainsail down with it blowing 50 knots. And I said, you what? He said they jibed that vessel. And that's the way these Gloucester fishermen did it. You just wouldn't believe it. But what they did, and only Gloucester fishermen would be able to do a thing like this, that right in the height of this storm, they were carrying the mainsail, and they decided they got to douse it. So they sheeted it all the way out. They ran off before the wind. It was all the way out to the knot. And then they grabbed the halyards and let them all go. Well, there are no lazy jacks on the Gloucester fishing schooner. They only have one single top and lift. So when the sail came down, the whole thing came roaring down and went right overboard, went into the water. Then when the whole sail was full of water and it was laying alongside the vessel, then they jibed her over. On the other jibe, they only had the foresail up in the jumbo by that time. They jibed her over on the other jibe, and they sheeted in the boom while the sail was still in the water. they carbuncled it in the cross shakles. Then they took the gaff and they lashed that to the boom. The sail was still laying in the water, and they took a long boat hook and they reached out and they picked up the reef kringle right on the very back end leech of the leech of that sail, and they got the wind underneath it, and it picked that sail up, water streaming everywhere, water all over it. It picked it up and it dumped it right on top of the housetop, right at their feet. And there it was. All they had to do was put the gaskets around it. That's the way they stowed that sail in 50 knots of wind. Well, he said to me, "You wouldn't do that with your vessel." I said, "No way, Jack, no way, not at all." Well, so the Gertrude Thebaud, MacMillan got this going. Gertrude Thebaud built as a fishing schooner to race the Blue Nose. Here they are racing the Blue Nose, and you can see the decks are all clean. The crew are all sitting down, the crew of fishermen all sitting down under the weather rail there, getting out of the wind while the vessel was sailing along close haul. And she's doing some going there, isn't she? But as I say, they got the flag up, and yes, they were racing. They were racing the Blue Nose at that time. Well, now if I can punch the right things here, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Now, do you see it all right?
We do.
Okay. Whew.
In the year 1937, in Gloucester Harbor, Gloucester, Massachusetts, Captain John T. Crowell, Captain Jack as we know him, has just joined the schooner Gertrude Thebaud, one of the MacMillan expeditions to the Arctic on scientific endeavors. Captain Jack was one of the very special people engaged in Arctic exploration in the early 20th century. We are privileged to be able to add to this biography some of the vocal impressions and the raw footage of his experiences on the schooner Gertrude Thebaud deep in the heart of the Arctic. I hope you'll enjoy the excitement in this presentation as I did when I first saw it. I'm Captain Jim Sharp. This is Admiral Donald B. MacMillan, a prodigious Arctic explorer and the driving force of this expedition. Captain Ben Pine, a notorious character in the Gloucester waterfront, he was skipper and owner of the Gertrude Thebaud through her fishing career and her racing career. That's Captain Jack Crowell on the left, master of the Gertrude Thebaud expedition to Frobisher Bay and veteran of 5 prior voyages to the far north, including 2 trips as skipper for MacMillan on the famous little schooner Bowden. Now let's join Captain Jack and let him tell you his story.
What I want to tell you about now is the year 1937, and I hadn't been up in the Arctic for quite a time, and I got word from MacMillan that he was going to charter the Gertrude Thebaud, a schooner built for the fishing trade in Gloucester. Now, she was built for a fisherman, but she was also, as I say, they had an eye to her being a fast vessel too, so they more or less compromised on her. She was a little leaner than most fishing vessels. I joined her down in Gloucester, and MacMillan had arranged, I think we had, with the crew and with these young passengers, mostly young men and a couple of scientists, that he'd signed on for the summer. There were a total of 35 of us altogether. And Ben Pine, who owned the vessel, Ben Pine was then one of the well-known fishing vessel owners in Gloucester. I didn't know much about this vessel. I hadn't been around Gloucester much while she was that particular period of time. But I just assumed that she was well built, built up in Essex, in Story Yard. But I really didn't know much of anything else about her. So I went down and after a few days we sailed. Ben Pine went along with us and 2 or 3 of his friends. We went as far as Labrador, up through Cabot Straits, and along the west coast of Newfoundland, and up to Labrador into Battle Harbor. First, I want to tell you that we went as we usually did on those trips. We didn't have the means of navigation and the means of sounding and taking sounding and so forth that's common amongst even all the fishing vessels nowadays. We went along, if we were getting into bad water or into uncharted waters that we thought were near the coast that were shallow, one of us would go to the masthead, and in the clear water, the water's usually clear except around the glaciers, you could look down deep enough and see a little bit ahead of you so that you had some chance of stopping the vessel or maneuvering so you would avoid any underwater obstructions that might bother them. And we had sail, yes, but again, when we're trying to make time, I mean, you have a certain length of time to go up and finish a voyage and so forth and get back in time for these people to go back to their colleges or to wherever they go in time in the fall. You use the sails, but I mean, they don't do you too much good. And also if you're maneuvering in unknown waters. Now, all of these places that we go, practically all of them that we talk about, practically all of them had no soundings whatsoever. And of course, this is one of the greatest dangers you have with this type of navigating. We say we're going into new places where we don't know, and so sort of no chance of them. But if you don't take a chance and go in without, then you don't see it. You can't get there. So that's what we're there for. We want to see these other places. Now we're in what we call Gabriel Straits, and we're just about the end of the lower part of Frobisher Bay. I knew Frobisher Bay. And we started to move up the bay, and my idea was to get up to a fjord that I knew of where we could anchor. So we moved up the bay, and now I'm looking for a place that I can anchor. I didn't worry much about it then. Now all this time I'm in the masthead and I don't know what's under me, you know, and this begins to wear on you because we tried and we tried and we tried and we couldn't find a place where we could get water shoal enough so that our anchor would drop. Oh yes, we came out and then I began to meet the ice. Now this is just early August, and I know from past experience that the ice is just beginning to come out of the upper bay in August. Again, that's about 100 miles of it, you know. And although it's not old ice, it's 1 year ice, and it's enough to bother. By this time, I'm knowing that this vessel isn't going to take any battering in the ice.
This vessel was built in 1930. She was the last of the great Gloucester fishing schooners built at the Story Yard. And as a result, she was built of all the short ends, all the little pieces left over from all the Gloucester fishermen, the literal thousands of them that were built before that. Everybody knew that she was built of these short ends and was a weak vessel.
So we went into this place that I'd been in before in the Bowden, and where I'd anchored and where I'd laid several days. And it's way up at the head of the bay. I mean, the head of the field, as far in as you can go in the field. And there's a little corner there where we ran up, it's high tide, and dropped the anchor, backed off a little bit. Well, by this time I'm pooped, you know, everybody's tired and so forth. So I took one of the boys, now I said, you stay on deck, the rest of us are going to try to get just a few winks of sleep. It's not blowing or anything, but if it blows at all, if any breeze comes up at all, you watch and see if we start to move in the slightest bit, give me a call right away. I went down, I suppose I fell right to sleep. Next thing I know, somebody's calling me. Before I can get on deck, I know she's aground at high water. I could tell by the feel of it, you know. So I said to this boy, I said, call it, go forward and call everybody in the forecastle. Everybody is sleeping in the forecastle, and get everybody on deck just as fast as you could. Don't bother for them to get clothes on or anything, but tell them to get right up here as fast as they possibly can. Well, by this time, he's aroused, you know, and he's feeling awful because he didn't call me, you know, in time. She was aground and she fell. She fell over on her side towards the cliff. If she'd gone the other way, she'd gone bottom up, because the shore goes down like this, see, in the very deep water. She fell over. And, well, the gang got out, you know. And, well, I wasn't as perturbed as I should have been, perhaps, but although I couldn't do anything, she's aground, and there she is. Now, the big high cliffs going on up there, up, I don't know, 2,000 or 3,000 feet. They go right, almost vertical. You go right up. Not cliffs, but mountains, you know, and the ice cap is behind. But I'd had the Bowden in there. I've had the Bowden aground a number of times. This is something I don't care what anybody says. If you're going to do that work the way we did, with what we had, you're going to get in trouble. But if you've got a stout vessel under you, a small grounding isn't catastrophic. You know what I mean? She's stout enough, you should come up. And so tide went out, and we could practically walk around her. MacMillan came to the rail, and he said, Jack, he says, I think she's bilged herself on this port side where she fell over, you know. Say she fell over. She listed first, you know, and then settled down. As the tide went down, she got her bearings all around. She was lying on a boulder about midships, just between the foremast and the mainmast. By this time, because it's all dry outside of her now, except the rudder, I guess, is in the water a little bit, but she's practically dry. Then I went on deck, and the mate called me. He said, I've got to show you something. Mr. Johansson, who was the mate, took me forward, and right at the abreast of the foremast now, in the fore rigging, you could put your hand down in between the deck planking and the covering board, and you could carry your hand right along there, all the way down past, almost to the break of the poop. And that thing is wide open. Well, now I'm really worried now, you know, because I'd had a vessel ashore before, a couple of them, you know, especially the Bowden and everything, and if this was a Bowden, I wouldn't be worried. So anyway, there was nothing much to do until then the tide started to come. See, the tide is coming actually it's coming by this time, all right, but we didn't have to wait very long, because the tide began to come inside of her just as fast as it came outside of us. So she's leaking everywhere, you know. And now we weren't expecting this.
Some pictures.
I mean, we knew we were in trouble. We didn't, but we thought this vessel was going to rise. But she's not rising. She's just filling. It came and came, and it came until it was up to the scuppers. The tide is up to the scuppers. She's still on her side. And it came until it's up to the hatch combings, you know, and it's still, the tide is coming. The vessel is, by this time, is full of water. I mean, the forecastle is full. Everything down below is flooded. The radio operator is down now. Radio shack, the radio room is on the starboard side, a little higher than that. And he's standing in the water until the water comes up to his knees, to his hips. Cold water too, you know, but he's still plugging, trying to get tried. Finally had to give it up. The tide still comes. And as I said, just as it got up to the hatches and looks as if it's going in over the hatches, combing, she suddenly righted herself. She came right up, just like that, rolled back and forth a couple of times and stood there. She just moved back and forth, starboard to port. the water would roll, the sea would roll in the scuppers on one side, roll right across the deck and roll out the other side. It was almost up to the, on the inside was almost up to the deck beams, you know. Now everything's underwater. Starting forward, all the stores are underwater. Now, because we had not, or I should say, had not realized that this vessel was going to fill this way. So we didn't, we're in the cliffs. There's no beach or anything. You got to climb any time you go ashore. So we hadn't taken out much of any stuff to save in case we were marooned there, you see. We did get some things. So the forecastle is full. Every bunk is full of water. The engine room is underwater, out of sight. Air compressors are underwater. The only thing that's above water that happened to be on the high side and high up were the batteries, you know, in the engine. Even in aft where I live and where several of the others, the mate and several others live, everybody's bunk is underwater except mine. Now what to do? No pumps? Well, I'll take it back. We have 2 hand pumps, but it's standard equipment on it. But that's only all we had to pump that vessel out and get her out of there before the tide dropped again, because everybody grabbed something, a bucket, a dishpan or something. By now we got 35 people, and all of them are just as scared as I am, I'm sure. So everybody grabbed something to bail. And we had 10-gallon tins that we carried, milk cans, that's what they were, the big old-time milk cans they used to have with a big cover on the top. And we rigged that up so they could dip them up and we'd heave them up and go over the side. But everybody else grabbed anything they could that would lift water. Well, we pumped, and every time you get, everybody getting exhausted, you know. And then someone said, I think we're gaining. Well, I couldn't believe it. No, I couldn't believe it. But in a little while, sure enough, we are. So this encouraged everybody. Now, this is a big vessel. I mean, it's got a lot of water. You can imagine what a vessel that size has got water in there with all that. We pumped, and we bailed, and we bailed, and we pumped. We dried her, 35 of us. Now, this sounds like a damn lie, but it's funny when people saw it and we brought her home. But anyway, we got her dry, and she didn't seem to be leaking anymore. She's afloat now. We got the motorboat hooked onto the stern and dragged her out past this, out of this cove. That's what I'm trying to say. Out into the open part of the. And we sailed out of the bay. By this time it was late afternoon. We were sure some damn glad to get out of there. And she wasn't making any water. She wasn't seen to be making any water. But now we had no engine, see? So the chief said, I said, well, what do you think about it? Well, he said, take it easy. He says, I don't know, but you give me 2 of those boys. I'll take 2 of those boys. We'll go down the engine. We'll close the damn door, and I don't want to be bothered at all. We'll see what we can do. Now, as I told you, the batteries were on top of the water, see? So this gave them a start, and they got an air compressor going, and we sailed along, jogging along. And it's beginning to sink in now how bad off we are, see? Anyway, the first and foremost thing is to get an anchorage and get straightened out here. And just before we started to turn into this bay is where we're going to anchor. The engine coughed. You know, you had a couple of explosions. I couldn't believe it. This is an old-time Fairbanks Morse diesel. And in a little while, it coughed a little more. And just before we got to where we wanted to anchor, the engine's running again. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. We went into anchor, and then the reaction started to work into them, you know. They go down below and here's, Jesus, every piece of bedding, and the place is full of salt water. And of course, the fact that my bunk is the only dry one in the ship didn't help things out any. We're finding no leaks. She's not leaking any. And then Mac called me, I think, after the second day, and he said, "You know, Jack, I have promised these people that we're going to take them up over the Arctic Circle. You know, my idea is to get this vessel home as fast as we can." But he talked me out of it. So we started out with that old wreck as she was then. But all the seams had come together. I mean, the deck planks had come in where they were supposed to be. There was a hump in the port side and the rail. I don't mean the long thing like that, but a rough lift in it, you know. So something's out of wrong. And so we started for the Arctic Circle. And we went up to almost to the Arctic Circle. I mean, some of them were grouchy by this time. They claimed that I didn't go that far and so forth, but we were close enough to it. And the only reason we turned around, I couldn't go any farther because we began to meet ice up on the shore, you know, at midnight one night. And of course, it's late in the fall now. We're beginning to get a little bit of darkness. So we begin to see the scattered ice, you know, and we're working into it thicker and thicker. So, and I said, no more. So we turned around and started home. But and that's when the only chance I had to really see how that vessel could sail. So we put the sails on, and she just the four sails, and she logged 12 and 12 and a half knots in there. She was a beautiful sailor. Sometime later, they sold her to down to Venezuela, and she blew ashore in a hurricane, I believe, down there. And I guess that was the end of it. But that's the story of the Gertrude Thebaud.
Well, when I asked Captain Jack if he would do it again in a vessel as weak and unwieldy as the Gertrude Thebaud, his answer was,
that wouldn't have made any difference. I know I was young. I loved this type of work. I would have gone if she had a glass bottom on it.
Captain Jack's father, worrying about his son, way up there in the Arctic, looking for consolement, went to talk to his friend, the owner of the Gloucester shipyard. He turned to the old shipbuilder and he said, "My son has taken the Thebaud to the north." "Well, taken the Thebaud to the north. Well, he'll never bring her home." But Captain Jack, proving them wrong, sailed the old vessel home anyway.
Oh, good. There we go. Building airfields in the high Arctic, 1941. Jack got carbuncled into that, building airfields up in the Arctic, and spent a number of years trying to do that. 2 years in Thule, northern Greenland, and he became advisor to the Air Force. And they built an airfield on Fletcher's Ice Island, which is a a great big piece of ice in the middle of the Arctic ice cap. They built an airfield, the first airfield ever built on the ice cap, and actually used it landing Air Force planes. This was the very first one that landed there, and they had a bit of a skidding stop, I guess you would say. But that's what Jack did. He spent years and years in the Arctic after the Thebaud fiasco, and finally he got associated with the National Science Foundation, and they did Antarctic research. The first vessel they got, the Cannon, wonderful vessel that he was quite fond of. She was an interesting vessel. She had a great ballast tank underneath the bridge, and when the vessel would roll, and these vessels rolled bitterly in a seaway, she would roll over, and then the water would all rush down on one side. So when she rolled back again, her roll was dampened. And they say she was a very comfortable vessel for Antarctic research. Then a vessel called the Hero was designed for this purpose. And Jack said, "Here's the best job I ever had, building of the Hero in 1968. This is a wooden vessel. He was able to convince them that they should build it of wood because of the insulating qualities. And that vessel did wonderful, wonderful research all over the Antarctic. Well, that pretty much concludes the presentation. Captain Jack Crowell, of course, he passed away in 1986. Alice passed away 2 years before him in 1984. There was a great big flag that he had, a great flagpole on Kimball Island. And as long as the flag was flying, Jack was all right. He was living there by himself toward the end of it. And one day the flag was not put up, and Jack was found passed over the bar, seated in his favorite chair in his living room. So there you have it. I'm sorry for the goof ups. I want to just mention to you, this was number 22 of the Zoom programs we've done. We did all the schooners in Penobscot Bay there, and we did pilots of the Penobscot. We did schooner cooks. We did tugboats. We've done quite a lot of it. We have one more Zoom program we're going to do. I have some footage of the far north with Donald MacMillan. On December 5th, in 2 weeks, we're going to try and do that one. Hopefully I can hit the right buttons this time and we can get it done. But thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. If you get bored and want a good book to read, get a copy of my book, With Reckless Abandon. That's my memoirs, 40, 50 years of voyage in there. And, based on fact. You never know. They say 10% exaggeration is legal. But anyway, with a $25 donation to the museum, you get a free book. What a deal. Oh my God, donate now. Get your signed copy. Thank you for coming. Any comments, any questions you have? Now's your chance. Unmute and give us the devil.
Jim, somebody's asking, when the Thebaud ran aground, how is it possible she took on so much water, yet there was no source as to the cause?
That there was what?
How is it possible she took on so much water when they couldn't find the cause?
Well, because she was leaking all over. She wasn't leaking from one seam. Of course, the whole hull was racked. And, the vessel was, as I say, built of short ends. And the vessel opened up like a basket. And when she got off the rock, then she got back to her old shape again because she was supported all the way around evenly from all of her planking. But you remember when she was on that rock, he said he could put his hand right down between the waterway and the decking, right at that seam where the decking met the side of the vessel. She was racked so that the whole side of her bulged out and opened that seam up. And of course, the water would run right straight down in there when the water came over the deck. But it's utterly phenomenal that she actually floated off of that with all the weight of her engine and everything else. They were able to float her off of that without being out there without any communication. There was no way to help them. Nobody even knew where they were. And they must have, well, bailed for their lives, which they did, and they were successful at it. Good question. Any more questions? Okay, well, thank you all for coming. And I hope you will be in touch with us. Go to our website, and all of this will be taped. It was all taped, and it'll all be on YouTube now. So you'll be able to go to our website, go to the happenings page, and you'll be able to link right through to watch any of the Zoom programs, any of the 22 that we've done so far. So, bon voyage, and have a good winter. I'm Captain Jim Sharp, signing off.